Hi, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Bree. Today's video, we're going to wrap up all the books I read in the month of December to finish out the year of 2023. In the month of December, I read a total of 12 books, which I think was tied for my highest month of the year. Usually I do about 10 books a month, so this one was a little higher to finish out the end of the year. I ended up reading 123 books, which I had thought I was further along, but I ended up kind of softy and DNFing a couple things. So 123 books is still something I'm proud of for my reading. And I read a lot of really good books this year, so that's what really matters. But anyway, let's get into talking about my books that I read in December. I've decided to talk to you about them in the order of oldest release to newest release. So the oldest release I have was released in 2016, and then the newest release I have to talk to you about was released in 2023. So let's just start with the first book, and that is a ebook I read because I was looking for things along the lines of Becky Chambers' A Prayer for the Crown Shy, something cozier, and I was just kind of perusing different recommendations when you click on the book in Goodreads and what it gives you. And what popped up was the Cybernetic Tea Shop by Meredith Katz, and this was a short novella. I believe it was like around 100 and some pages. It was a romance, sci-fi fantasy romance. I think it's more sci-fi leaning. It's about this AI technician who kind of is a nomad, goes like place to place and just kind of jumps around a lot, and grew up in a migrant family who was constantly moving around for work. You start as she's leaving one town and going to the town of Portland, and this is in like a futuristic type society, and then you're encountering a tea shop owner who is an AI, and we're following both those characters as they meet and come together, and it's a romance between the two. It's an asexual romance, and it's a female-female romance. So I really did enjoy it, but I think my main critique is that I wish it was longer, because you kind of get them meeting and then you're kind of really like in the romance kind of right away. And there's some points in here that you're dealing with, like the idea of staying in one place or moving on from things. And with the AI, I forget her name, her perspective, Sal. With Sal's perspective, I really wish we could have got a little more time to get more of her backstory and get more of this tea shop and like the flashbacks to her life before, because she's over 100 years old. She's like trying to reach 300 years in this tea shop, so she's reaching that 300 years, and you're just seeing her grapple with a lot of things. So I wish we had more time to explore that. And then the relationship part, I wish had a little bit more time to develop, and I wish we just had a couple more scenes to see that like growing infatuation with each other, for it to be really powerful. But I did think it was cozy. It wasn't quite as cozy as Prayer for the Crown Shy and Song for the Wild Built, but it was still a cute, cozy sci-fi that I would definitely recommend if you're looking for a kind of cozy fantasy sci-fi romance. I think this one was pretty cute and pretty good, and I liked everything in it. I just wish it had more. I wish it had more conversations about what it means to be sentient and an AI. I wish it had more to the romance and stuff. So it was just a good first step, but I wish it had more. So that was the Cybernetic Tea Shop by Meredith Katz. Next book I have was released in 2017, and that's A Conjuring of Light by V.E. Schwab. This finishes the reread that I'm doing with my husband for the Shades of Magic reread, so that we could read A Fragile Thread of Power, which is a continuation of this series. It's a new series, but it's like a couple years after this series. So this is the third and final book in that, and I really like this the best out of all of them. If you don't know, we're following this magic system that has like multiple Londons, and there's people called the Antari who can jump between worlds, and they're very rare, and some worlds have less magic than others. So we're following Kel, who is part of the world that has the most magic, as he's going along and jumping from different areas and kind of trying to be the diplomat for his kingdom. And he ends up getting into some trouble that launches this whole thing. And this one is obviously wrapping up a lot of what happened in all the books. And I think what I liked about this one was we were getting more perspectives, and we were specifically getting a perspective that I think really rounded out the story and actually is one of my favorite perspectives. And so for that, I really, really loved it. I just wish we could have got more throughout the other books of this specific character and their motivations. I think this one's pacing was better than the other ones, because right away you're dropped into the main conflict because of how the book 2 ends. You're dropped into the main conflict, and then it's a series of like things they have to do to beat the big bad in this book. I think it created a lot of dynamicness to the story, and I liked how we were jumping perspectives. It didn't feel like too many jumping perspectives because everyone's kind of got their own role they need to play in this, that you're just getting to see all the moving parts and how it's all going to come together. I really, really liked it. I think the way it ended, I enjoyed as well, and I do think it left it open for what potentially the next book could have. It was wrapped up in a way that a lot of things are wrapped up, but I think that there are a couple things that maybe have inklings to what might be in the next one. So I would say overall, when I originally read this series, I think I would have said it's one of my favorite series, a fantasy series ever. And upon reread, it just isn't a 5-star series like I thought it was going to be because I have such fond memories of it. I still feel a lot of nostalgia for it, but I wouldn't say any of the books would get a 5-star for me now, just because I think my reading taste has changed a little bit. And while I like the characters, the third book was like the type of characters I wanted to see from like the first two, if that makes sense. So I liked getting so much more backstory, and I wish that was present in the first two more than it is. Especially for certain characters, we just really don't get a lot until this final book. So that's my only critique. I think it's fun, and I think it was a great rereading experience. It showed me how much I really should reread books. While this is not a 5-star book, the rereading experience was a 5-star for me. So I definitely need to go revisit some favorites of the past couple of years this year. That's something I hope to do, maybe like a couple of them throughout the year, just to bring that nostalgia back. It's really fun. I've learned to reread. So that's A Conjuring of Light. After 2017, we jump all the way to 2020, and the first book I have in that is The 100 Years' War on Palestine by Rashid Khalidi. This is documenting everything from 1917 to 2017 that's happened in Palestine, and it's a pretty dense history of the war and colonization of Palestine and just the different series of wars that have gone on and the different ways that the global community has helped to aid in this genocide that is currently happening. Even though the end of this book is in 2017, it really shows you like how everything led up to where we are now. And I really, really appreciated this book. I think for me, it took me a long time to get through because of how dense it is. It's very much a history, very much reads a bit like a history book. But the thing I did like about this is that he also inserts parts of his own life, because for a lot of this book, he is alive during this. I think there's parts of his family and he's having like letters and things passed down that he's referencing because his family's been a big political figures within Palestine, and a lot of his family have been scholars, and so they are passing down a lot of history, and so you get references to that, and then later you're getting his own experience and where he was during certain things that have happened, and I think that really is powerful. There's a specific part near later half of the book when we're getting into like the 80s, and he's talking about him and his wife and their children and how they have 2 daughters and his wife is pregnant at the time, and the impact it has of war and on these bombings that are happening on his daughters, and how they didn't really know how it would impact them until later, and then showing how later when they're in Egypt and more of a safe space that their daughters are really showing signs of this trauma where when loud noises happen they get scared and things like that. And even their young son, who is born later, is afraid of loud noises for a long time, even though he was just in the womb at the time. So I think all of that adds a really good context to it, because on top of getting the history, you're also getting a lived experience of someone who's gone through this. And I just think that this really shows just how deep this history has gone and how much, especially here in the US, we learn only one side of the story, and how we are very much shown a lot of things in a skewed way. And I just think that this was so powerful to read and so important to read. So I'm really happy I picked it up, and I really recommend it if you're looking to learn more of the history behind what's happening in Palestine. So really happy I read this. This is one of the highlights of this month. Though I would say I read it over the course of a couple months, but in December, definitely a highlight. I will say 2020, the year of publication, was definitely probably my highest rated books. I had a couple really good ones in 2020. So stuff that was being published in 2020, I guess, was a good year. So the next one I have is Blacktop, Wasteland by S.A. Cosby. This is also published in 2020. And this is the second book I've read by S.A. Cosby. I had originally read Razorblade Tears last year and really, really loved it. It's very much an action-packed thriller. And what I loved about Razorblade Tears was it was an action-packed thriller with commentary on the real world. And this is doing a similar thing. So we're following Beauregard, whose family has been in this small town for a really long time, and he's kind of gotten out of the criminal underbelly of this town for a little bit. His father was a big part of his life back in the day, and his father was someone who brought him into that life, but his father has been missing for a long time. And we're following him as he is now a mechanic, and his shop is really struggling. He's living in poverty and trying to provide for his wife and his kids and just trying to make a better life, but struggling so much. And he's a very good driver. He races on the side with people, and he wins a lot of races. He's just one of the best getaway drivers. And he is approached by an old acquaintance who promises the job of a lifetime, and he kind of takes him up on it because he really feels he has no other choice. There's a lot of things stacking up against him. And we're following as this one last job gets crazier and crazier and threatens to destroy him and his family. And it's really a conversation about race and poverty and privilege, and also a look at like the responsibility of parents and just this one man who is trying to provide for his family and really struggling, and just like how he kind of feels he has no other choice but to go back to this life that is very dangerous and illegal. And so it's a thriller. It's very action-packed. It's very like gory. There's a lot of gore. It feels very like dude thrillery. I did really enjoy it, but I would say I don't like it as much as Razorblade Tears because I think that there was just more action in this one than in Razorblade Tears, and it just, I don't know, it just didn't connect with me quite the same, but I did enjoy it. And I think if you're someone who really likes like action-based thrillers, maybe you could like this. I read it on occasion, but it's not my preferred, but I just think S.A. Cosby does this genre really, really well, and so I will continue to pick up his stuff because I really like his stuff. But overall, I just think this one wasn't as good, but I have all The Sinners Bleed on my TBR, and I've heard good things about that one, so I'm excited to pick that one up. So yeah, it was a heist type story too, which I really enjoy. So if you like heist stories, this is one as well. But it's just very gory and very action, but I like it, and I like the inclusion of different topics that S.A. Cosby always brings into the novels. The next one was also released in 2020, and that is Deathless Divide by Justina Ireland, which is the follow-up to Dread Nation and ends the duology. This is a zombie type story that's set back in during the Civil War time period, and we're getting an alternative history as if the Civil War never really ended because zombies rose up. While slaves are now freed, they are used as the people to fight these zombies, so they're on the forefront of this zombie apocalypse. And we're following our main girl Jane, who is going to this girls' school to learn how to fight these zombies, and then there is a mystery that happens there. And in this one, we're also getting the perspective of Catherine, which was another of the women at this boarding school with her. I liked that we were getting two perspectives this book. I kind of wish that the first book also had Catherine's perspective, but that being said, I really, really loved the first book, so I wouldn't really change anything, but upon getting Catherine's perspective in this one, I just think it really rounded out the story. I didn't like this one quite as much as Dread Nation because I think that it just dragged a little bit for me, but I do really like seeing Jane's evolution of everything and how she changes throughout the book, because in the first one, she very much is kind of like the same character, and she's tested along the way, but in this one, you really see like a transformation of her character, and you see her kind of go through a lot of spectrums of processing everything that's been happening to her. And then also, I liked following Catherine's perspective because you get her backstory and why she is the way she is, but you also see another way of handling this terrible situation because they've been together for the first book the whole time. You're kind of seeing how two different people can deal with the trauma that's unfolded. This one, again, like goes in a direction that I just didn't really see coming, but I think really fit the story. And so overall, I really liked this duology. I think Justina Ireland just has a way of writing that I really connect with, and the audiobook was narrated by Bonnie Turpin, which I found is someone I really, really like in audiobooks. And I think that the humor was still there in the way that Jane like talks and deals with things, but this one was a little bit more serious because you're dealing with just like a bigger scale of issues. I think overall it was a really great YA historical fantasy, and I would highly recommend if you haven't given it a try. I was very hesitant with zombies because zombies aren't really my thing, but this actually turned out to be something I really enjoyed. So it was another branching out of my comfort zone, and I think it really, really worked out. So very happy I read it. And I would also recommend Ophie's Ghost by Justine Ireland, which is a middle grade dealing with ghosts. I think that one is also a really good one by her. Okay, this is the last 2020 release, and it was also a very big win for the month. So that is Against the Loveless World by Susan Al-Bahawa. This is written by an exiled Palestinian writer who is now residing in the US, and this is something I read for the Read Palestine week, and it's something that I've been wanting to read more by Palestinian authors just since everything that's been going on and learn more. And this one was a really, really good one. It's a very harrowing story. There's a lot that happens in it, a lot of trigger warnings. But we're following our main girl, Nar, and we're following her from her young age all the way into adulthood. It starts where she's living in Kuwait with her family, and there's just a couple events that happen that lead her down this path that is really a dark path and really shows kind of the abuse of women. And she just really has struggles in the beginning of her life, and then we are following it in different stages. So different, like, there's chapters, but then there's sections that are broken up, and we're following her and her family as they have to move multiple times within the story because of different events that have happened throughout the Middle East in relation to Palestine. So a lot of times her and her family are uprooted because they're Palestinian refugees, and a lot of countries will then not let them stay, so they have to uproot because there's a lot of bombings and things. So we're following her. She goes to Kuwait, she goes to Jordan, she goes to Lebanon, she goes to Palestine. There's all these different stops she has to make throughout her life. And the beginning of the book is very difficult to read because there's a lot of things that she has to go through that are very dark. But then in the later half of the book, you're getting to see her have a found family kind of thing. Like, she has her family, but she also gets this family in Palestine that really bring her together and give her a sense of community and give her something to fight for. And I really appreciated that. There's a lot of darkness and sadness that goes on, but you also get to see the hope and the ways that she continues to thrive and live a beautiful life despite all these things. And I think that this was a book that just brought me so many emotions. It was heartbreaking, it was joyful, it made me really appreciate and learn about the things that Palestinians have had to go through, and just this sense of never having a real home, just constantly being displaced and then constantly feeling like you have no home, because even though Palestine is where her family came from, she doesn't really feel that sense of connection to Palestine because she's never lived there. And so it's like this idea of mourning and yearning for a place you've never been able to go, because knowing it's your home, but then feeling disconnected because you've never been a part of that, but it's so rooted in your family. And there's a lot of talk about family traditions in here. Her mother sews traditional Palestinian thobes, which are like dresses that she has to hand stitch in different stitches, in each different pattern and stuff she makes is telling a history. And it's very interesting to just read about how much their history is passed down through this dress and just all those kind of traditions. There's parts about them going in Palestine and going to the olive trees and making a community visit to like pick olives from the olive tree, and just all this stuff that just shows like this deep, rich history. And I just really, really loved it. It was such a good book. It was something that I will think about for a long time coming. Now we're gonna go to 2021, and this one was kind of a flop. And that is A History of Wild Places by Shay Earnshaw. I borrowed this from my coworker and friend, and she had recommended it to me, and it just did not work for me. This is a cult story. So we're following this man who's looking for this woman who had gone missing years previous, and she was a writer of this children's book. The family of this woman is paying him to go search for her, and he has this like ability where if he touches objects, he can see memories and stuff of this person. So he's using objects of hers to try to find where she went. And then we're getting the perspective of this cult, and it's in the middle of the woods, and we're just kind of following these two people as they figure out what's going on. There's a couple reasons why I didn't love this. I'm not a big cult person. I don't read a lot of that stuff, and I think that there's something not as interesting to me about reading about a cult because I already know that something's not right, and you're just waiting for the characters to figure out what's not right. Now, it's interesting because in certain horrors, like I think of Comfort Me with Apples, you know that something's wrong, but the characters don't know that something's wrong. But I think in those stories, you're getting more told it in a way that everything seems normal, where in this, you are being very much led to know that things are not normal. It's hard to describe, but I think that there's a difference for me with cults. I just know what needs to happen way before the characters do, and I don't really like that. Specifically, Kalla's perspective, I felt like was a little exhausting to read, and it was just kind of like the same kind of thoughts going through her head for the whole thing, and I just feel like the mystery wasn't my favorite. I just feel like I saw a lot of things coming. A lot of things were very easy to spot because of like how it's written. Things were given away like earlier in the book. I just feel like everything that was supposed to be surprising, I read it and thought, well, yeah, I saw that coming. And overall, it wasn't my favorite. I don't know. I feel like I don't have a lot of thoughts on this. I read it. I'll probably forget this book in a short amount of time because it's just one that like did not leave any kind of impression on me. The characters weren't very strong in my opinion, and the plot wasn't very strong in my opinion, and I'm just not a cult book person. So unfortunately, it was not a win. I also would not recommend the audiobook. I did read it mostly on audio and I did not enjoy it, so maybe that hindered my experience a little bit. But yeah, that's a history of Wild Places by Shane Arnshaw, which was just not a hit for me. So now we're on to 2022 releases. This is one I don't have physically. I read it on ebook, and that is Thread of Angels. I read this for a reading vlog that I will link up above. It was where I was trying to read 150 pages a day, and this is by Rebecca Roanhorse. It's a short little novella that's about this girl who works these card tables at this bar. So she's half of the elect race and half of the fallen race, but she passes for elect, which is like the esteemed race in this world, and her sister does not pass at all. She very much looks like she's a person who's part of the fallen race, and so she has this like privilege that not a lot of people have, where she can kind of go into the elect society and not be questioned for a lot of things. So at the beginning of the book, we're following her in this bar, and then all of a sudden these cops essentially come and take her sister away for the murder of this man who is an elect man, and she has to try to figure out what happened and clear her sister's name. This is very much a story about sister bonds and the lengths someone will go for their family, and it's a mystery type story where we're kind of following her as she's sleuthing through different things, but she's set up in a way that she is kind of at the whim of a lot of political movements. So while she's trying to figure out what's going on, she's being led by some political figures and maneuvered in ways that she can't really control. And I found all that really interesting, except for I just wish that we got more of a backstory into her and her sister's relationship, because you get glimpses of it. I wish we could have got more, because while she's fighting for her sister, I wanted to see like why this bond is so strong. Even though family bonds can be strong, I just think as a reader, I needed a little bit more. Like, what have her and her sister gone through to really prove why she is like so attached and so close to her sister? She really kind of like babies her sister and takes care of her as like a mother figure. And so I wish I would have seen more like that evolution in their relationship and like how it came to be, because they've been having to take care of each other since they were young. But I did really like the conversations she was having about being passing in this society, the feeling of not belonging in the elect society, but knowing she needs to use that to help her sister, and just all the things she has to do while passing, while hearing like horrible things said about the fallen and stuff. The other thing I wish was stronger was the magic system. I think magic was used, and like how the world works and the lore behind like these different races and stuff was interesting. It had to do with like angels and demons and stuff, but I just didn't fully understand it. I wish we had just more pages to flesh out that relationship with her sister and then the magic system. But overall, it made me really excited to read Rebecca Roanhorse again. So I do have Black Sun on my TBR that I really want to get to, because I think that with a full-length novel in a series, I think she could do really cool things. I just think in a novella format, I just wanted a bit more from the story. So that was Thread of Angels. Happy I read it, happy I gave it a try, because now I'm really excited for another new author. Still in the 2022 releases, I have Before Your Memory Fades by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This is translated from Japanese by Henry Truslow, I believe. Joffrey Truslow. This is the third in Before the Coffee Gets Cold series, and this one is at a different cafe than the first two, but is owned by the same family, and we're following similar themes that we did in the other ones. This one's mainly about grief and loss and going on after losing someone. There's some trigger warnings for suicidal ideation in here, but I do think that the way it was handled was a very soft approach to things, and I think that's one of the reasons why I really like this series, is because you're kind of going through some big emotions and topics in a soft, gentle way. And I do think that this one was a bit more repetitive than the other ones, because you're constantly being retold the rules of the cafe in like every single story. And so I know that can get competitive. I know that can get repetitive for some people, but for me, I just really like being in this world. There's something so soft and cozy about it that really keeps me reading. I love like episodic stories and stuff, especially if the world is something I really like, because it feels cozy and gentle to me to come back to that world. And so this has been a series that I just enjoy going back to. And I do really like the stories in here. I think that my favorite story was either The Daughter or The Young Man. Both of those I think were the best. I think it was like the first and last story are what really got me in this book. But I would say it's not my favorite out of all of them. I think my favorite is still the first one so far. But I will continue to read this series for as long as they're being published, because I just find them so cozy and wholesome. So that's Before Your Memory Fades by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. Now we're still in 2022. We got to my favorite book of the month. And that is Kaikeyi by Vaishnavi Patel. If you've already seen, my favorites video has come out before this, and this was one of my favorite books of the year. It was snuck on in there in December, which is why I don't record my video too soon, because sometimes in December, favorites have been known to sneak on in there, and this was one of them. I read this again for the 150 pages reading vlog, and this was one I picked up because I had just heard good reviews on it. I've been wanting to try like mythology type retellings, and I thought this one sounded really, really good. So in this, we're following Kaikeyi, who is, in the original stories in the Ramayana, is this evil stepmother who banishes her son. In this, we're getting Kaikeyi's story all the way up till she banishes her son. It's a very slow-paced story. You're literally getting Kaikeyi from her early childhood into adulthood, and the things I just loved about this were seeing all these relationships that she weaves. She has this magic that tethers her to other people, and she can see like the threads of them, and she can kind of manipulate them, and the way she has to do that in order to like help her kingdom but also like not damage relationships, I think was so interesting and so well done. And I think Kaikeyi as a character is someone that you can really root for, because you get to see like all sides of her and why she's making the decision she is. It's also about women's roles and how in the original stories she's just an evil stepmother, and this really gives her her story back and is a way to see all the things that could have happened, because in a lot of these stories you don't get a big perspective. They're very one-dimensional characters just serving to be like the evil stepmother, and I think that this was very, very well done. I really liked seeing also the relationships between her and the other wives, because her husband is the Raja, and he has with her included 3 wives, and I think that it was so interesting to see like them actually building this friendship and this family together. It's something that I think a lot of times you see it in a way that's just women like pitted against each other, and I think just seeing them like really become this close-knit family was really, really cool to see. And yeah, I just loved every minute of it. I really feel like this has no critiques for me. It's a slow-paced story. It's very much a character study of Kaikeyi and the choices she makes, and it's not very action-packed, but never was I bored at all in this story. And so definitely a favorite, and one I will be thinking about and recommending all the time. Okay, we have 2 more, and both of these were released in 2023. The first one I have is the completion of a trilogy, and that is The Secret Service of Tea and Treason by India Holton. This is the 3rd and final book of the Dangerous Damsels series, and I would say if I was ranking them, my favorite would be The Wisteria Society of Lady Scoundrels, then this one, then the League of Gentlewoman Witches. Wow, that's hard to say. This one is following a couple as they're both undercover spies, and they are having to infiltrate this house with a bunch of pirates and try to figure out where this stolen thing is that could really kill the queen, and they're trying to figure it out and save the queen, and they have to have a pretend marriage. I really liked this one. I think this one and The Gentlewoman Witches was a bit more insta-lovey than the first one, which is why they aren't as good as the first one in my opinion. But I did like this one from the standpoint that they're pretending to be married. I thought it made it a fun element, and I liked seeing all the other characters from the previous books come back and be like thwarting them or helping them along the way. And these two characters are very much trained to be like very proper, and there's no fun to be had. They get very worked up at like the ridiculous things the pirates do, and I think it's just really fun because they're kind of both curmudgeons, but they're both like top of their field as spies, and they take it very seriously. And so I really liked that aspect of it. Overall, I just don't think it was the strongest one, but it's probably middle for me. So I would recommend this series as a whole if you like fantasy, historical romance, and you just want something that's like kind of fun and weird and just like a good time. I would recommend this, and I really did enjoy it. I especially liked it on audiobook. I just think it's fun to have this like prim and proper British kind of humor with this like ridiculous plot that's happening. Everybody's very much like, you have to follow the rules of etiquette, but then also things are just happening that are super ridiculous, and I really like that. So that is Secret Service of Teen Treason. And then the final book I have is Murder at the Merton Library by Andrea Penrose. This is the 7th in the Rexford and Sloane series, which is my favorite historical mystery series that I've ever read. And this one is following a murder that happens at this library that is someone that Rexford knew in his past, and it really impacts him. And then there's also some fires that are going on that have to do with these steamships. We're during the time when they haven't really created the proper technology to be able to travel very fast and far in like steamships through the ocean, and so everyone's kind of in a race to get this invention because it will end up in a lot of money for whoever does invent it. And we're following a mystery of like those two things and how maybe they are related. And yeah, I enjoy this. I think it's not my favorite book, but at the same time, the reason I keep reading these is just truly the characters and the found family in here. And this one, I felt more than the other ones of this kind of repetitive nature of like, we get some facts, we all meet and we discuss it, and then we go figure out another clue, then we come back and we all talk, and then we figure out what next steps are, and then we do the same thing over and over again. So in that way, it did get a little repetitive, but at the same time, I just have a good time with these characters. I just want to know that they're safe, and I want good things for them. So I would say it was not my favorite, and I think for some, maybe the series would get a little old after the first few, but for me, I just still really, really love it, and I will still continue to pick it up, even though this one just felt a little like slower pace. At this point, we have a lot of characters we really find endearing, and that's what keeps me reading. So yeah, I'm happy I read it, and I don't regret getting this right when it released because I will always be reading the Rexford and Sloane series. There you go. There are all the books I read in the month of December. Happy to have 2023 over and see what 2024 has in store for me. I hope you're having a great start to your year, and thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.